Alright, well, this is another unlisted video on my channel. It deals with the information which relates to this oscillator control register, register 22, and then the explanation of all those bits is here. The reason I'm creating it as a separate unlisted video is I don't know that YouTube promotes or even really wants a video where somebody is just reading the information contained in a copyrighted piece of published material. So that's actually the honest reason why. Not that I'm up on all the rules. I'm going off into very boring details, but that is why I'm doing things. So a minute in, I'm going to read this. Oscillator control register. The OSCCON register 22 controls several aspects of the device clock's operation, both in full power operation and in power managed modes. The system clock select bits SCS1 to SCS0 select the clock source. The available clock sources are the primary clock, defined by the FOSC3, FOSC0 configuration bits. The secondary clock, timer 1 oscillator, and the internal oscillator block, period. The clock source changes immediately after one or more of the bits is written to, following a brief clock transition interval. The SCS bits are cleared on all forms of reset. The internal oscillator frequency select bits IRCF2 to IRCF0 select the frequency output of the internal oscillator block to drive the device clock. The choices are the INTRC source, the INTOSC source, 8 MHz, or one of the frequencies derived from the int-osc post scaler, 31.25 kHz to 4 MHz, if the internal oscillator block is supplying the device clock. Changing the states of these bits will have an immediate change on the internal oscillator's output. On device resets, the default output frequency of the internal oscillator block is set at 1 MHz. When a nominal output frequency of 31 kHz is selected, IRCF2 to IRCF0 equals 000, users may choose which internal oscillator acts as the source. This is done with the INTSRC bit in the OSCTune register, OSCTune 7. Setting this bit selects the internal oscillator as a 31.25 kHz clock source by enabling the divide by 256 output of the int-osc post scaler. Clearing the INTSRC selects INTRC, nominally 31 kHz, as the clock source. This option allows users to select tunable and more precise int-osc as a clock source while maintaining power savings with a very low clock speed. Regardless of the setting of INT-SRC, INT-RC always remains the clock source for features such as the watchdog timer and the fail-safe clock monitor. The OSTS, IOFS, and T1 run bits indicate which clock source is currently providing the device clock. The OSTS bits indicates that the oscillator startup timer, OST, has timed out and the primary clock is providing the device clock in primary clock modes. The IOFS bit indicates when the internal oscillator block has stabilized and is providing the device clock in RC clock modes. The T1 run bit, T1CON 6, indicates when the timer 1 oscillator is providing the device clock in secondary clock modes. In power managed modes, only one of these three bits will be set at any time. If none of these bits are set, the INT-RC is providing the clock, or the internal oscillator block has just started and is not yet stable. The ID-LEN bit determines if the device goes into sleep mode or one of the idle modes when the sleep instruction is executed. The use of the flag and control bits in the OSCCON register is discussed in more detail in section 3.0 Power Managed Modes. Note 1. The timer 1 oscillator must be enabled to select the secondary clock source. The timer 1 oscillator is enabled by selecting the T1 OSCEN bits in the timer 1 control register, T1CON 3. If the timer 1 oscillator is not enabled, then any attempt to select a secondary clock source will be ignored. It is recommended that the timer 1 oscillator be operating and stable before selecting the secondary clock source, or a very long delay may occur while the timer 1 oscillator starts. Oscillator transitions. PIC 18F4525 devices contain circuitry to prevent clock glitches when switching between clock sources. A short pause in the device clock occurs during the clock switch. The length of this pause is the sum of 2 cycles of the old clock source and 3 to 4 cycles of the new clock source. This formula assumes that the new clock source is stable. Click clock transitions are discussed in greater detail in section 3.1.2 Entering Power Managed Modes.